My point is, the diagram itself is a static artifact. It's a deliverable that could be wallpaper if that's your taste, but it doesn't give you the answers that you need. It doesn't align the team, right? There has to be that negotiation of reality. There has to be that discussion around it, right? So for me, the mapping is a collaborative activity, and the map becomes a centerpiece. It's like the campfire you all gather around, but you need the engagement around it in order to bring it to life. Here we go. Yeah, I am Jim Kalbach. As Veronica mentioned, the author of several books. The one that we're going to be talking about today, or the topic that we're going to be talking about today, comes from Mapping Experiences. That's the second edition, came out in 2020. The first edition was 2016, and back then, in 2016, so I started writing the book in 2014-15. The question at that time, more or less, broadly, was, what is a journey map? What is an experience map? How do I create it? There you go. There's the first edition, Joe. You need the second edition. But since then, that's almost 10 years ago when I actually started writing the first edition of that, I think the question space has changed to now, okay, what do I do with this? How does this help me innovate? How does this help my team find opportunities, right? And that's what I want to focus my attention to. So if you're new to journey mapping, I recommend maybe, getting the book and follow the guys here at UX Prussia to learn about how to create journey maps. What I want to talk about is what I call journey map activation, is how do you make it come alive, right? I will give a little bit of a background, though, before I get into some specific techniques. And, the way that I like to frame things is based on this quote from Steve Jobs back in 1997. So this was after he got asked to leave the company that he founded, right? They brought him back, right? And they said, Steve, come back and save Apple. And he said this in a town hall meeting. There's a YouTube video of it, and you can watch it, where he says, you've got to start with the customer experience and work back towards the technology, not the other way around, right? And I think at this point in time, not necessarily because he said that, but around that point in time, I think people started getting the memo, as we say, that they're not the center of the universe. Your technology is not the center of the universe. Customers are, right? And we need to switch our perspectives, right? And even though, human-centered design existed before that, I think in business, this idea of being customer-centric, right, and the experience economy and all these terms started to come around at about that time, maybe a little earlier as well, too. Start with the technology, work back, start with the experience, work back towards the technology, not the other way around. Now we have the question, well, how do I understand experiences? How do I understand human experiences, right? There's no beginning and end. They include fuzzy concepts like emotions, and there's variations in people's needs and things like that. And what I started to notice is that there was this practice going on with different names like service blueprints and customer journey maps. I think underlying all of that was this idea of, we need to understand the experience so we can figure out the technology, not the other way around. How do we do that? And it's not, how do I do that? How does Jim do that? How does Julie do that? How does Joe do that? It's, how do we do that, right? How does an organization, a team that's trying to deliver experience, how do they understand an experience so that they can work back towards the technology? And for me, that was the motivation, I believe, broadly in our fields, for mapping in general, right? Because we were trying to get a way to talk about experiences. Here's an example of it's called an expressive service blueprint. Don't worry about the labels. But it's basically a type of experience map, right? This is for visiting an ophthalmologist. So it's a visit to a doctor's office, right? And the top part here in this kind of pink and purple area, that's the individual's experience in a nutshell, right? It's just a snapshot. It's highly reductive, just a snapshot. So you see actions, thoughts, and feelings. What do they do? What do they think? How are they feeling? The feelings are given by that curvy line here. So you go to the doctor and you wait for the doctor, and then you meet with the technician and you get instructions. Oh, and then by the way, your experience continues, right? That's why I was saying it's fuzzy to talk about experience. And then you go home and you take your eye drops or not. The bottom part of the diagram, though, the bottom part of the diagram shows what the organization needs to do in order to provide that experience. And there's even a layer down below. This is what they call backstage, right? So these are things that the patient never sees, what goes on in a doctor's office. The point of me telling this is because the underlying principle here for me is alignment. What you're trying to do is you're trying to align your technology. And in this case, the technology is a service. By the way, when I say technology, I don't mean computer chips or even software. The technology is how you deliver your value, right? And they deliver their value here through people and desks and forms and things you sign up. That's the technology behind the experience here. What they want to see is, how does our technology align to the experience, right? And you get this, it's a literal physical alignment, right? I can see, oh, at this stage, we need to do this. At this stage, we need to do this, right? It kind of goes up and down in this diagram, but we get this alignment. That helps us, a group of people, a team, understand the experience and its relationship to our technology, right? So I refer to all of the labels out there. And by the way, it's a jungle. Just as a quick aside, you'll find every combination of term out there: customer experience blueprints and service journey maps, and you can almost do like a word generator for what you're going to label this type of diagram. So I'm not hung up on the terms. I do, by the way, in the book, I do make some distinctions between those, but I'm not hung up on those terms, because underlying this, from my perspective, is this notion of alignment. We want to think from outside in, start with the experience, work back towards the technology. Therefore, everything needs to be oriented to the experience at the top of the diagram here, right? So that's fundamentally what journey maps and experience maps do for us, right? And they do it in a visual way. This is very important, right? Because I could go out and talk to 24 people about their experience and write a 50-page report about what their experience is, right? What happens to 50-page reports in your organization when you pass those 50-page reports around, right? Send an email, hey guys, read this report, read this attachment, right? If somebody even opens that attachment, are they going to be able to connect what's on page 1 with what's on page 17, right? The thing about a visual diagram like the one I just showed is you can see cause and effect in the same overview, right? You can see beginning, middle, and end in the same overview. But I think more importantly, the idea of visualizing the experience has an effect on the team as well, too. Right. So here's a great diagram from Jeff Patton's book, User Story Mapping, which is another type of map, by the way. I think I talk about it in my book, User Story Mapping. And he's trying to illustrate the power of visualizing together. Right. So in the first panel in the upper left, the team says, I'm glad we all agree. Right. But if you look at their thought bubbles, right, they actually have different mental models of the thing that they're trying to solve for. Then they put it out on the blackboard. That blackboard is key in this story, because it's an externalization of what people are thinking, right? Oh, I'm thinking triangle, and you're thinking a circle, and you're thinking a square. Oh, wait a minute, we can negotiate reality. In the bottom left, I call that negotiating reality. And we don't do that enough in our projects. You ever get into the middle of a project and you're 3 months or 6 months into it, and suddenly you look at each other and go, oh, we're not aligned, right? So that's what we're doing here. And then they, in the perfect world, they negotiate the shape and the color of it, and you get more aligned. It's never that, it's never that harmonious in the end, but you want to get closer, right? And again, if our imperative now is, as Steve Jobs told us, to start with the experience and work back towards the technology, we need to get aligned around the experience. That's, for me, what journey mapping does. And it does it visually, right? The visual component to journey mapping is not unimportant. It's actually critical. So I talk about, in the second edition of my book, I actually highlight this even more, and I have this diagram in there. I talk about outside-in alignment, right? That's kind of what your goal of creating the diagram is let's not look at our own technology and our own service provision. Let's start externally and work back inward, right? I call that outside-in alignment. Outside-in alignment. But there's a second type of alignment that you need. I call this inside across alignment. That's the people. That's the team. The group of people that have to deliver the experience. They have to have a common mental model of not only what the experience is as it currently exists and the future experience. It also has to have a common mental model of how they're going to get there as well, too. right? And that's 50% of the challenge, right, is getting there, because innovation and creating value and service improvement, those are all social activities. Whether you like it or not, it's a group of people that's going to do that. And if the hearts and minds of those people are not aligned, you're not going to get the delivered experience that you desire. The problem is, I think, that people put a lot of focus on the map itself. So as I was preparing for this last week, I just want to use this as an illustration of a big objection here to journey mapping. This literally happened to me last week, right? So I'm out there on LinkedIn, and somebody name checked me. This was a post. It was about it was last week sometime, and they said, here are all these resources on journey mapping, right? And you can see my name, that they listed all these resources, and they pointed to my book. Okay, great. I came in here and commented on it. So I looked at this, and I thanked the person. But then the first comment, here's the first comment that I read. Great deliverables, but often nothing more than wall decorations after creation. I was, oh no, right? Okay, so here we have somebody, okay, they're on board with mapping, but they seem to be static for them. It's nothing more than wallpaper for them. I hear this all the time, and one of my responses is, well, you're doing it wrong. So if anybody ever gives that the objection, say, well, you're not doing it right. And here's why: because it's not about the map, it's about the mapping. And I love the way you formed the question at the beginning of the session, Veronica. It was, where are you with your mapping, right? So in case you didn't catch the distinction there, that's a noun, map, and mapping is a verb, right? So my point is, the diagram itself is a static artifact. It's a deliverable that could be wallpaper if that's your taste, but it doesn't give you the answers that you need. It doesn't align the team, right? There has to be that negotiation of reality. There has to be that discussion around it, right? So for me, the mapping is a collaborative activity, and the map becomes a centerpiece. It's like the campfire you all gather around, but you need the engagement around it in order to bring it to life and to get that inside across alignment, right? So this idea of journey mapping activation, I think it's not just a workshop. It's not just a one-time thing. It's something that you can think about across your mapping activity. This is the generic process that I propose in my book for mapping, regardless of what type of map you're going through. You're creating, whether it's a service blueprint or a journey map or something else. Basically, you initiate it, and that's about making it relevant to the organization, scoping and framing it the right way. Investigation, basing it on research, then making it visual, illustrating it, and then I call it aligning, right? This is where you make it actionable. And that's I'll talk about that a little bit more here. That's where you might have a workshop there or something where you actually come together. What I want to talk about, though, is you can actually use each one of these kind of modes of working, or each one of these phases, as an opportunity to get in touch with your team and to bring them into the process. Okay. So I'm going to go through this process, not through the lens of how do I do that? How do I initiate? How do I create a map, right? I'm not talking about the creation. What I want to show is the layer, that social layer. How do I bring people into my mapping activities, right? And then ultimately what you want to do is make it actionable. So I'm just going to go through each one of these. Number one, initiate, make it relevant. This is kind of my reduced question set anytime you're creating a map, because here's the thing: you got lots of customers, you got lots of users, you got lots of journeys. The question is, which customers or which users and which journeys? You have to answer that question first, right? I call that the point of view. Those two questions go into the point of view. You also, journeys sometimes don't have a beginning or end, right? At least or said another way, the beginning and end is given by definition. You have to define when the journey begins and when you end. I call that the scope of it. And then the other question is, what are you going to include? What are the information that you're going to type into UX Prescia, right? That's what you're focused on, right? So these are three questions that you, as a map maker, you need to answer up front. Guess what? You can bring people into that discussion. right? And it's really healthy for lots of reasons. One is to help you get on the right foot and make sure everybody's on board, but it also then you start getting that inside across alignment as well too. So here are some things that you can do. Stakeholder mapping, external, right? So think about the domain that you're talking about. Grab some of the stakeholders, the group of people that are going to be consuming your map, right? They're consumers of your map. You don't make a map for your health. You don't make it for wallpaper. I don't know. Has anybody made maps as wallpaper? I hope not. But you don't make it for your health. It's also not a value creation artifact. That is, you don't sell maps. It's not something you show to your customers, right? So the consumer of a journey map is an internal group of people, right? Bring that group of people together, or parts of that group of people together, and say, in our domain or in our field, who are all the stakeholders or the actors in our field? That's the external stakeholder mapping. But you also want to know who are the internal stakeholders as well too. These are two simple exercises you can do with a group of people before you even show them a map to get them into the mapping process. Also, which journeys are most important? Is it the onboarding journey or the service journey or the offboarding journey? Put that question up there as well too, and discuss it. I think really important though too is, how does this align to our business goals? What are our business goals, right? There's a conversation. Basically, each one of these you can imagine as a type of a conversation that you can have with stakeholders before you even begin mapping, right? Here's what that might look like as well too. Stakeholder mapping, we can use a bullseye, right? So if you're in the field of this is just an example, right? If you're in the field of real estate, let's say you're an online real estate service, right? Who are all the actors in real estate, right? You're in the business of buying and selling homes, right? Well, you got home buyers, home sellers, home inspectors, lenders, real estate agents, the movers, neighbors even, like, and what you can do is you can have a conversation. So step one, brainstorm all of those people with the group, with your team, and then prioritize them. And you put home buyers in the middle and you get thumbs up from everybody. We're aligned. We're going to look at the home buyers and what their experience is. Well, which experience? Is it moving? Is it selling their old home? Is it finding an agent? Oh, we're going to look at shop for a home, right? So I want to create a journey map around home buyers as they shop for a new home, right? I didn't just decide that in a vacuum, though. I brought my team with a simple exercise like this. I brought them into that conversation so that a month later, when you reveal the journey map, they're not going, wait, this doesn't align with our priorities, right? So aligning to the team's priorities and making it relevant, there's a conversation, right? And this could be a half an hour long. I'm not talking about big upfront research. This could be a simple, quick call, right? But again, it's not just the one big bang workshop. It's doing these things throughout the mapping process that matter, right? And involving people. Investigation, step number 2, make it real. Ride along interviews. I have used mapping activities as a great reason to get stakeholders out of the building, right? Hey, I'm going to go talk to a home buyer about shopping for a home. You want to listen into my call if I'm assuming it's a Zoom call, right? Bring stakeholders, and you know what? More times than not, that interview is often the first time that people inside of my organizations that I used to work for have ever heard a customer talking in those terms, right? Because you're not talking about renewals or technical issues. You're talking to the person about what they're trying to get done, right? So it's a really great conversation for stakeholders to hear. Have them then actively note take. Say, okay, you're going to be and even if it's the CEO, you're taking notes. I'm talking, you're taking notes, right? Giving them something to do. It's not TV. They need to participate. So think about ways that you can make people participate. Just like in the previous exercise, they have to brainstorm the sticky notes and prioritize it. Here, they're not just listening to the interviews. They have to take notes as well, too. If you can, then get out of the building and actually watch people on site as well, too. That's a great team unifying activity as well too. The third, these days you might be in person, but these days you're going to be on Zoom. I was curious, maybe we can just do a quick, like in the chat here. When you do, for those of you who do interviews, if you're doing it on like Zoom or remotely, do you broadcast that inside your organization, or do you bring people into the calls? Is that a thing that people are doing these days? I kind of hope so. Sometimes, right? Yeah, and then you might record it as well too, right? Live stream, right? Yeah. It's actually even easier these days because you can get actually more than just one or two people to listen to the interview. The problem there, though, is you don't want to overwhelm the interview participants. So I always ask the people who are listening to not turn their webcams on and to remain completely silent, but also then tell the interview participant, my colleagues are listening, but don't pay attention to them, right? It's just between the two of you. But just something as simple as inviting your colleagues into your interview over Zoom with interview participants can go a long way. So number 3, making it visual, right? I think one of the things here is to actually draw and sketch together, right? We think about this, the map maker is the ultimate arbiter, and they gather and compile all the data and they create the diagram. And to some degree, that's true. Ultimately, you are the one who are, you're going to create that. But, why not draw and sketch? Why not try to create a draft map together, right? Particularly if they had been in the interviews, right? You say, okay, you took notes in the interview, you took notes in the, let's get together. Again, this doesn't have to be very long, half an hour, hour long. Let's take all of this and see if we can sketch out a map together, right? And involve them in the map making or illustration process as well, too. One thing that I like to do, actually during my interviews, this is kind of a crossover between the last phase and this phase. I like to have people actually sketch. So when I'm interviewing participants, or even if I'm interviewing stakeholders, say, hey, can you sketch out that journey for me, right? So this is an actual from my own research, and you can see my handwriting at the bottom and the other individuals' handwriting at the top as well, too. So we were negotiating reality even at this point in time, right? The other reason why I wanted to show this too is maps don't start out looking, high fidelity. Maps start out and it's rough, right? That it's, I have this clue from this person, and this clue from this person, and this clue from this person. It's really almost like a detective. And what you're trying to do is get all the stories and the patterns, right? That's ultimately you're looking for these different patterns. But it starts out messy. Bring people into that messy phase as well, too. Open up the backstage, quote unquote, of the mapping process, right? Here are examples of, kind of creating things together. This was me down in Mural. I say down because we're from Argentina. This was in Argentina. And, we did it digitally as well, too. So it could be remote, it could be in person. These days people are doing more and more digital work in general, but the map creation and bringing people into the creation process itself. You can see on the screens here, we're kind of creating something together. That's also very healthy for the discussion. All right, 4th phase, align, make it actionable. And I know that there's overlap of the use of the word actionable here, but I do think then there is that moment. So those small touch points go a very, very long way. But I do think you want a concerted allotment of time where you come together and you really engage with the map that you created together in a deep way. And here are a lot of things that there's a lot of activities that you can do. But basically, I build into all of my mapping projects, I build in a 2-hour to a 4-hour workshop. If I can get a whole day with stakeholders, I'll even do a whole day. And we're workshopping everything we heard in the field, personas, business needs, but then the map is the center of attention there, right? And once you have the map up there, digital or printed out, whatever you're doing, or in VR. Anybody doing VR mapping, by the way? I would love to see the journey mapping. Yeah, truly? Okay, thanks. We're doing a lot of experiments here, but I can imagine doing a mapping exercise together, the mapping workshop, right? I like to just have people walk through it, right? And often give them a pen and say, make any corrections. Again, I'm kind of opening up the backstage. I don't want to present it as final. I don't want to say, I'm the scientist, I did the map, here it is, you consume it, because then they're going to lean back and fold their arms. You want to give them a pen and have them lean into it. So say, make a comment on the diagram, or even fill in the blanks, right? Here's an activity that I do almost every time. Grade your own performance. I have an example of this where I have people grade or rate how well they support customers or users at each stage in the journey. You could also use things like dot voting or SWOT analysis, or even role playing, right? Okay, let's role play this moment, right, in time. These are just ways to get people into not the map. Again, it's not about the map, but into the experience that you're trying to align around. Here's a couple of, well, first of all, the point I want to make here is that your hat fundamentally shifts from a map maker to a facilitator, right? And I see facilitation as part of mapping. In fact, last time I was here, Veronica and Yulia at UXpressia, I talked about some trends in mapping, and the first one was facilitation. I talked about the role of facilitation in the mapping process, not in the level of detail. I just kind of threw it out there. But this idea of map making and facilitation, they go hand in hand. Absolutely. If you don't bring in the facilitation piece, you end up with wallpaper. and that's the observation of the LinkedIn post that I showed you there, right? Here's an example of a mapping session that we did with some folks at Intuit back in the day. You can see this is digital here, but we created this service blueprint in the background with there's a key on the left-hand side. Each one of these colors means a different facet of the service experience. And we mapped that together along with some data that we had as well too. But the thing that I want to point out is the conversation. You can see the conversation that we had on top of it, right? All those circles, right? And then this star right in the middle, there's a star, right? We didn't just put that star on. The map didn't tell us where to put that star. We only put that star there as a moment of truth after we had a conversation. And we did all the boxes and arrows and brought in a screenshot. Look, we even brought in a screenshot. Well, what does that look like at this point in time? And then we had this theory about a back and forth experience, that there was this service experience that we were sending customers back and forth. Okay, why is that? And well, here's the key thing right there to stop the back and forthness of the experience. We need to fix this, right? That prioritization came out of the conversation. So there's a layer of mapping, but there's also a layer of a conversation that we had on top of it as well too. That was facilitated, right? We didn't just send around this document as a PDF attachment as an email. We did it together in real time. And the map maker became the facilitator as well too. Here's another example. This is the grade your own performance. This is a specific exercise now that I like to do, where I have different breakout groups, right? So I like to go into, individual activities, but also breakout activities and then plenary discussions and things like that. The exercise here was to read through the journey based on the journey map that we have provided them and grade how well does our company support people at each stage. In this case, they gave them a 6, which was the lowest number. This was 1 through 6, where 6 is the worst score. And then this group gave a 3, and it's the same stage. So we went into breakout groups, and this group is like, yeah, we're pretty good. And the other group is like, no, we suck, right? So what did this group of people know that this group of people didn't know, right? There's an instant conversation, right? There's an instant conversation. So I also brought a diverse group of people together. And I consciously do that. You don't want everybody to be the same. You don't want to just bring UX people and product managers together. You want marketing, engineering, right? And this group of people knew something that this group of people didn't know. And we had a conversation. And so, oh, we actually aren't good at this stage. We thought we were, right? So there's that learning effect and that social effect that happens as well too. So, here's a map from UXpressia. I would expect an exercise to look like this, with dot voting and icons and boxes and arrows on top of it, right? It's that conversation layer, but the map is the centerpiece for the conversation. That's what keeps us grounded in being customer centric. That's what keeps us grounded in start with the experience and work back towards the technology. Because having this conversation piecemeal or without the diagram, you're gonna lose sense of where the experience is, right? So the map becomes kind of the storyboard for the conversation as well too, and it ensures that you're staying experience centric and customer centric, and also that it's valid and it's based on evidence, right? Because the way that you created the map, it's not just fantasy. It's based on research and evidence. All right, now you might be saying, okay, I got your book, Jim, and some other books, and I've been to all the UXpressia webinars, and I know how to create a map. Now you're telling me I got to be a facilitator? What do I do there? Here's some great resources. You can screenshot that. Game storming, if you don't know that one, it's basically it's like a reference book of exercises that you can do. And some of them you can overlay right on top of the map, some of those exercises like dot voting and clustering and things like that. Some of them might be ancillary activity. Okay, now that we have a pain point, we identified a pain point we all agree on. How are we going to workshop that, right? And you get some really great tips there. Same with innovation games. But then there are other books that are out there that are, basically facilitation books in and of themselves. I might also recommend Priya Parker's Gatherings, if you know Priya Parker's book. And there are other books on facilitation. You can go out there and find them. You don't have to change your job title, and this isn't a career change, and you don't need to be certified in that. I'm just suggesting that you go out and do a little bit of reconnaissance on how do I lead a conversation better around mapping. So here are things, though, that you want to do, though. Once you understand and empathize with the journey, and once you've done some diagnostic activities like finding the biggest barrier, right? You now want to prioritize them and identify which barriers are the most important to go after, and then start coming up with solutions, right? So now we're into kind of design thinking, right? How might we overcome the barrier that we found, right? And you're not just putting the map up there as wallpaper or even interacting it. You're starting to connect that to the solution space to say, okay, what are we going to do about that? I think that's also part of mapping, actually. When I conceive of mapping, again, a map is not value for your organization in the sense of a customer-facing deliverable or something that you're going to charge. It's a way to get to a solution that creates customer values. Therefore, the solutioning part of the process should be part of the mapping process as well. Does that make sense? So think about that as well, too. Design sprints, a map is a great input into a design sprint. And it helps keep that group of people together and aligned to the experience. Start with the experience, work back towards the technology. In order to keep people grounded in that, the map, it's right there. There it is. I can see it. Because here's the thing, and this is the last point I'm going to make before we take some questions. Ideas are overrated. There is a huge gap between having an idea and executing that idea. There is a lot that happens in between those two things. And one of the mistakes that I used to make earlier in my career is I would generate ideas, right? There's an actual picture of an outcome of a workshop, a mapping workshop. I'm like, here are the ideas, guys. And I handed it off and I was like, damn, the business just couldn't do anything with that. Well, they're not going to be able to do that because this is a wall full of sticky notes. There's no value in an idea, right? And in fact, it's easy to come up with ideas. You want ideas? I'll give you ideas. In fact, most organizations, does anybody work for an organization that doesn't have enough ideas? Like that, the problem is you don't know what to do. Like nobody has any, what do we do? I've never worked for an organization where a lack of an idea is the problem. It's usually the opposite. It's usually we have too many ideas and we need to prioritize what they are. That's the negotiation of reality, right? And the prioritization criteria that you're bringing to the table with a journey map is the experience. We're going to prioritize our solution based on what we think the experience needs to be, right? Not on technical resource constraints or budget, budget limits and things like that, but rather what's the right thing to do for the customer. That's how we prioritize our ideas. So don't take ideas as your output. You want to go further and you want to start articulating the ideas, right? Prioritize them. That's what this one on the left is, a prioritization grid. But then, okay, let's take the ones in the top right or whatever your selection mechanism is, and let's sketch them out, right? Because a sticky note with an idea is not fleshed out. That concept is going to change and morph over time. You want to try to get as far downstream as you can in a short amount of time. And taking a sticky note and sketching it doesn't take a lot of effort. In fact, these days you can start creating prototypes and things like that. This is an actual journey mapping workshop where we put the map up, we talked about it, we brainstormed, we prioritized the barriers, and then we actually created a quick prototype and brought some people in and did usability testing in the workshop. In the mapping workshop, we had a quick usability test with 2 people, and that's what you're seeing over here. This is the other room. So this is the workshop team over here, and they're looking at a usability test in the other room of the concept they came up with in the morning. right? Guess what? That idea on the sticky note from the morning changed based on that, right? So we were able to come out of the workshop with a little bit of evidence and signal, right? Because your initial prioritization is not going to be right either. We know that as well too. Evaluating concept. This is another example of that. It's actually the continuation of the workshop that I showed an image of before, where here we brainstormed ideas down here. You can see this right here. We had this map with the 2 loops in it, and we brainstormed ideas, and then we clustered them, and then we selected some of them. What we did was we actually used usertesting.com and overnight, so we had this 2-part workshop. We did 2 hours one day, 2 hours the next day. And overnight, we threw up one of our concepts on usertesting.com. And then we came back the next day and we had signal. We had like 5 people that hit that test on our concept, and we got feedback the next day, right? So I guess what I'm encouraging you to do is to think, not only how can I engage everybody in my team throughout the process, early on and in this big workshop, how can I continue that conversation as well too, right? Last example here too, threw up a map. You can see all the handwriting on there. That's because I gave people a pen and I said, what did I get wrong? Be vulnerable. It's okay to be vulnerable, by the way. Oh, and by the way, vulnerability actually builds trust. People think that subject matter expertise builds trust, but it's actually vulnerability. So I find that as a facilitator, when I say, what did I miss? And I give people a pen, it actually helps them build trust in me. So you can see I gave them a pen and we discussed the map. It's a very simple diagram. It doesn't have to be that, but it's aligned to the outside perspective, outside in alignment. Then we did the inside across alignment here. We generated ideas. What is there, 50 sticky notes there? It's easy to generate ideas, right? It's super easy to generate ideas. That's not the hard part. The hard part is, okay, what is that idea? And how does that actually work? So we started to sketch it, and we actually created this storyboard. We had a graphic artist that we hired to create this was after the workshop, by the way. So after the workshop, we took our scribbles from the workshop and we said, make this look nice. And we created a storyboard. We then threw that storyboard up on the open web as this concept that we got feedback on. We had this 90-second video that walked people through our concept, and we got feedback on it as well too. So the other component is, how are you going to keep the momentum going, right? It's the mapping, not the map. The map has no momentum. A noun has no momentum. In fact, the noun is going to have inertia, right? A map is going to have inertia by itself. The momentum comes from you, because you took your map maker hat off and now you're a facilitator. And that facilitation, you might say, wait a minute, Jim, we're far away from mapping here. This is a lean experiment. And it was a lean experiment, by the way. Now we're into lean. Like, how far should I go? It's like as far as you can, right? To keep that momentum going. Keep the momentum going. Thing is, we planned this out in advance. Like before we even went, this was part of the mapping effort that we defined. I said, no, we're going to do a workshop and I need resources to do XYZ afterwards as well too. You ever think about that? It's part of mapping. I think so. Maybe I'm pushing the limits here, but that's my job, because I'm giving the webinar and I'm trying to push your thinking. So I hope that helps. So activate the mapping process and beyond, right? Don't just say, oh, my job is to create a map, throw it over the fence, and then blame those people for not knowing what to do with it, right? That's pretty much what that quote in the LinkedIn post was. You get these maps thrown, I don't know, what is this? I might as well make wallpaper out of it, right? So you want to move from wallpaper to something that's alive and actually motivates and aligns. That it's that alignment, the social alignment, mental alignment that you get from that as well too. So thank you for that. I think we have a little bit of time for questions.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much, Jim.
All right.
Thank you for the presentation. And thank you for showing us the difference between the map and mapping. Well, it's not about journey mapping is a journey, not a final destination.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. We could have named this the journey of journey mapping. Actually, that's a nice little cute little. The marketing people would love that one, right?
Absolutely. That would be the great title, actually. Well, that's the perfect time for the questions. We already have some in the backlog, let's say, from people who send them through the whole event. Those who have ones, be sure to type the questions in the chat. You still have a chance to get the answer. And also, well, Jim mentioned how journey mapping collaboration is helpful to make the map actionable. And you know what? If you're looking for a professional tool to collaboratively create journey maps during offline or online workshops, UX Russia is right here for you. Just book a 30-minute call via the link in the chat. Yes, we have the link in the chat to learn more about the tool and the features that might be helpful to you. And if you already build maps in some other tools and the whole idea of transferring them to UX Russia is overwhelming and just stops you from doing that, no worries, we can transfer the maps for you. So now let's move to the questions.
All right. I haven't been paying attention to the chat. I see there's stuff going by, but I would like you and Yulia, Veronica, to help me know what question to address first.
Oh, no worries. I have everything saved for this very reason.
Awesome.
So we have the question from Joe. How do you see journey mapping and service blueprinting similar and different? Theory, practice?
Okay. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I'm not hung up on titles because for me, it's ultimately the alignment, the outside in alignment, and then the inside across alignment. That's the key. However, there are distinctions between different types of maps and they have different reasons or different purposes, I should say. I do discuss those in the book. For me, a service blueprint, I mean, it all starts with what problem are you trying to solve? And this is something you can bring your stakeholders in to a conversation before you even begin mapping is what problems do you guys want to solve? Because what you don't want to do is say a journey map is going to solve everybody's problem. It might not. There's different types of journey maps, right? So what problem are you trying to solve? For me, the service blueprint, it's right in the name there. And even just the focus of a service blueprint, if you look at a service blueprint, a lot of it is around the backstage activity, right? It's often, sometimes it's even just a line of notes across the top of steps, right? It's very little around the experience. It is experience centric because that's your starting point, but most of the information and the data that you're collecting is around the service provision mechanisms. So for me, a service blueprint is really trying to solve the problem of the service provision and the service experience, right? Whereas something like a customer journey map might be, and it's, oh, sorry. The other thing is service blueprint can be very episodic. So like a support call is like kind of just like one touch point or one type of service, or even onboarding or something that's longer than that, but it's still pretty confined. And what you're trying to do is improve that service by looking at how you're doing it because something is broken in the service provision mechanism. A customer journey map, though, sometimes people look at that as the relationship of an individual to our brand over time. How do they first hear about us, right? Why do they decide to leave, right? So it's often at a much higher level, and it's going to be at usually at a much higher level of abstraction too. You're not going to get those friction points. Like a service blueprint is going to show you a specific friction point that you need to fix. The customer journey map might not be that detailed. Right? Like that star that I showed you on that one diagram, that was a service blueprint, by the way. It was really specific, like what the problem was. And that episode, by the way, was a support call. So you see, we took a support call and we blew it out into a lot of detail. And then we found a specific point of friction. Whereas a journey map may not be that detailed and it may not be as focused on the service provision. And it might even include things like the emotional state that we want people to be in, their relationship to our brand. Do they recommend us? Right. That's usually a journey map. The ultimate goal of of that type of journey is recommendation, right? Or loyalty, right? Loyalty or recommendation. Whereas a service blueprint is we got to fix this service for people. So that's just my take. You feel free to disagree with me.
Thank you, Jim. Well, we'll see in the chat if Joe agrees or disagrees. I believe Joe left the event earlier. Well, that's sad. We won't know if he agrees right now. Okay, we have another question from Dana. How would you differentiate between user journey and user flow?
A user journey and user flow? For me, it's that in my mind, that is one of specificity or level of abstraction. For me, like a user journey is like, how do I learn about a tool like Expressia, and then how do I onboard into it, and what happens after I use it? Whereas for me, a user flow would be a type of diagramming that I might use once I identify a specific point that I want to dive into, right? So I didn't quite mention this, but one of the things about, the workshop and the prioritization type exercises, the diagnostic type exercises that I mentioned, is that they help you identify at one level, like, where do we want to focus our attention as a team, right? That's the negotiation of reality. But once you do that, there's a whole new conversation that unpacks. And you might say, okay, let's specifically look in a lot more detail what happens right at that spot. And that's for me where a user workflow or user flow might come in, because it might be like, oh, they click on this button, they log in here, they pick up the phone. It's going to be very specific and very detailed. And that's the type of analysis you might do after you do an initial prioritization and get aligned. Then you might use a user workflow to work things out in much more detail. That's just my definition of those terms. Your mileage may vary.
Thank you, Jim. There was kind of conversation in the chat under this question. I think if you are interested, you can go through it after the event. We have another question from Morgan. How do you make the journey map specific to a user's experience, but also general enough to confidently make changes? For example, maybe a user you interviewed called in about a technical issue and had a bad experience, so it's an area for opportunity. But it's also not something everyone encounters.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the questions is like, what is a journey map? Because you have thousands, tens of thousands, in some cases, millions of customers, right? To some degree, it's a little delusional, maybe even arrogant to say, we're going to map the customer journey. What does that mean? What is it really? And for me, what it really is finding the patterns, right? Particularly if you're in software, but in any business, if you want to scale your business, you do that by identifying patterns, right? You don't scale a business by chasing every customer need and every customer request, right? You don't call every customer up. What you want to find are, what are the patterns that are out there, that exist out there? And that, for me, that's what a map is. It's really it's a map of the patterns that you see at a high level. There are always going to be extreme cases, outliers, and exceptions, right? I wouldn't deal with, so I use the map to have those initial conversations. I wouldn't bring those in until you do an initial diagnosis and prioritization, right? So we say, okay, here's the beginning, middle, and end. Do we all agree on that? Okay, thumbs up, and then proceed. Okay, let's prioritize where we want to focus our attention. Do we all agree on that? Okay, great. We got that. Now let's go down. And that's where you can say, yeah, but what about this type of user right here? And then you can still, but you still have to decide, do we want to focus our attention there, right? Is it worth us considering that type of outlier or not, right? Because you're always going to have outliers. Regardless of your service, there are always outliers and people on the fringes who have special, extreme use cases or different needs, right? What you're trying to do is you're trying to find the pattern of most people. Now, sometimes it might be useful to look at those extreme use cases. In fact, there are techniques in design and even research where you look at those extreme examples to try to come up with new solutions and innovations and things like that as well too. But I wouldn't do that until after you've decided on where you're going to focus your attention in the solutioning part of things, right?
Thank you, Jim. I actually was thinking, I read an interview by a businessman where he was actually talking about that if you have like one negative feedback on, for example, something not working, and then you have like a proof of hundreds of people's, being fine with that, it doesn't mean that you necessarily need to change anything just for that person.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's worth taking a look at that. Is there something there worth considering or not? So I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying your map may not include all those little it can't include every little variation in everybody's circumstance. It's going to be the pattern of experiences, and then you can consider whether you want to address that or not.
Absolutely. Next one is from Henning. During a mapping workshop, how do you keep sure that the map is well balanced based on data and assumptions?
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the map making process and the earlier steps that I talked about, initiating and in particular investigating. I mentioned bringing people in and trying to sketch things out together. That's more for the social effect of things, right? The mapping as a draft, the draft map as an activity is more about the social effect. I think you as the map maker, you always want to be looking at reliability and validity as well too of that data. Just because your colleague put a sticky note up there doesn't mean that you actually found evidence for that in the field. And that's kind of your job as that's part of the map maker role, is to make sure that the map is valid and reliable as well too. So it always it should be based on data. That data might be qualitative, quantitative, and very often it's a mix of sources. That's one thing that people want. Sometimes the assumption is that the data from Journey Map is going to come from one source. It's not. It's very often a bunch of sources where you get things, pre-existing reports, white papers that are out there, marketing surveys that you've done, interviews that you've done, actual like usage data or data that you have as well too. So there's and I mentioned this kind of detective mode that you're in, because when you're trying to find these patterns, there might be triangulation of evidence across sources.
I love your comment about the detective mode. Okay, we have time for just 2 questions, I guess. So here is the question from Monica. I work on a team where the next steps after mapping are someone else's responsibility.
Yeah.
Do you have
Yes.
any recommendations on how to get everyone on the same page with what to be done when it's technically someone else's responsibility?
Number one, bring them into the workshop, right? I mentioned a mixed group of people. Whoever's downstream from you, bring them into the workshop. At a minimum, bring them into the scoping conversation, right? Because there's a dependency there on what you're going to come up with, what's going to happen next. So when you're scoping the map, bring them into that stakeholder conversation, so that at minimum you're aligned on on what's going to happen. The other thing I think is to actually interview them as an internal stakeholder and find out what their needs are. And I showed that example of not only brainstorming, but also then lean testing, and see what is the signal that they need coming out of it to help them work, and see how close can you get to giving them that information as well too, with real data on user concept testing or whatever it might be, whatever they need to think about that. So bring that, know your downstream partners as dependents of your work, and bring them into the conversation. I mean, that's the point. That's literally the point of this talk, is to get the people along the whole journey involved in the conversation.
Well, I love it. Thank you so much. And the last one for today, from Fernando. We still have plenty of them, but we don't have time. So the last one will be from Fernando. How do we build a journey map that explore the user's journey, being agnostic from the current digital product? I mean, how do you focus on stages out of the digital space and communicate this to stakeholders or users?
You're asking me that?
Yes.
With no apologies, my default answer is going to be use the Jobs to be Done framework to do that. So the other book that I wrote in 2020 is called the Jobs to be Done Playbook, where it talks about jobs to be done. One of the key principles of Jobs to be Done is it's solution agnostic. So we can map experiences, we can map human behaviors without talking about technology, and Jobs to be Done gives you a framework to do that.